Awareness can be a powerful thing, especially when it comes to childhood sexual abuse. As a male survivor, you may be surprised to learn how much of the way you think, act, and react could have been moulded by your past abuse. Awareness helps you move from reacting to acting by choice. I'll get into more of that in just a moment. Hi, my name is Bruce. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse and I'm a Christian. You may not hear those two statements together all that often, especially from a male, and probably that's even rarer in church life, of which I've been in senior leadership roles for a couple of decades. So these messages are about bringing awareness, healing, and recovery to all victims of sexual abuse, but especially males. It's about going from victim to survivor to thriver. Now, I do wish to advise you of my disclaimer. I am not a medical professional, but what I intend to share is what has helped me over the years. Like myself, you need to determine what you feel is helpful and suitable for you. You may have heard the expression that if somebody ends up in a confronting situation, they may react in two possible ways: fight or flight. That means, or the phrase implies, that to get out of that situation, the person may either fight, overcome the problem by fighting back, an active response, or they may react the other way, flight, getting away from the situation, removing themselves from wherever they are. That's the more passive response. Let's get into that a bit more, fight or flight. A child who is in an abusive situation is no doubt scared, frightened, terrified even. Survival becomes one of the most important things to them. When you're trying to survive, you'll try anything to help make that happen. Not only is survival important, it is essential. So the ways in which a child tries to cope and survive are also essential to them. When adults look back on such survival actions, those fight or flight responses may seem bizarre, or they may seem completely expected, natural and resourceful even. It is probably different for every child. For me, I went down the flight path, but that was mostly in my head. I detached emotionally and, well, in fact, so much so that it created long-term emotional detachment issues in my life. I actually go into greater detail about emotional detachment in the Thriving series, which you'll also find here on this channel. Because sexual abuse is largely sexual, it is therefore also physical. Sexual abuse affects a person's views, experiences, and memories of sexual touch and stimulation. You may have heard of the term or phrase of muscle memory. It's where you get so used to doing something that it just happens automatically without thinking. Riding a bike is a great example. You push off and without even thinking, you get balance and then momentum as you pedal. When a person is sexually abused, there will be a physical response, much like when you bleed if you get cut. The after effect of that abuse can often be that when, as a survivor, you are now touched, there can be these fight or flight thoughts. You react. You're responding historically to touch that others had no right to do. It's important to understand and accept that as a child, you were more than likely not able to protect yourself. You were probably also powerless to stop it. To cope, many of us learned safe behaviours. That would have been different for each of us. We did what we had to do, or we did what we could do. These adopted behaviours can become ingrained. A blur between what was real and what was not may have developed. Perhaps a necessary lie you told yourself became a truth, to you at least. The unpacking and dismantling of some of our ways of coping can take time, effort, and to be open and transparent with you, that dismantling and rebuilding can also be sad, painful, and hard work. As you ponder such a thing, I want to encourage you from my personal experience that you do see the benefit and the results of recovery work like that. Awareness is a powerful thing. Acting on it is even more powerful. Let's move on now to threats to stay quiet. If you've been working your way through this series on awareness, I'm sure you are seeing way more than you ever did in regards to your past sexual abuse and its effects on your life. When I mention threats to stay quiet, you may either be able to relate to that, or you may think that was not something that you encountered or that you were faced with. Let me propose this to you though. Even though you may have never had any threats to stay quiet directly said to you, was that message perhaps implied? Or were there incentives to stay quiet or disincentives to if you didn't stay quiet? As you may know about me, I had several abusers. One of them took the bribery or reward path in order to obtain my silence. There were chores I got out of doing if I stayed quiet about the abuse. So was that a threat to stay quiet? Well, not a physical one. But what is a threat anyway? Isn't it an ultimatum? If you do that, then this will happen. If you don't do this, then that won't happen. Insert your conditions, bribes, rewards, or with threats that you may have had. Insert them here. Did you have any? I do hope you didn't, but for many, I think you probably did. So that might set the scene a little more for the threats or messages to stay quiet. Here's some more ways in which that can occur. No one in the family talks about it, the abuse that is. And by it, I mean things of a sexual nature. Many families, sexual abuse is not talked about, whether it's happening in your family circle or not. It's just not a subject that many people feel comfortable talking about. For many, anything of a sexual nature is also not talked about. The closest many get to sexuality or things of a sexual nature is the talk about the birds and the bees. I'm referring to those awkward talks about sex that usually happen during puberty. So that typical family environment of sex not being talked about can also send a message to stay quiet about such things. That includes sexual abuse, the very thing that should be talked about, especially if it is happening to a child. But tragically, it gets scooped up in the big bucket of things we don't talk about. Whilst that may not be a direct threat to stay quiet, the outcome is the same. You know, the greatest danger to recovery is isolation. For childhood sexual abuse to occur, especially repeatedly, there are often a number of factors all happening in the family or in a child's life. Mostly that means levels of dysfunction or a lack of healthy, positive support. A level of isolation is also likely, be that emotional, relational, or physical. If a child is being abused and there are levels of isolation happening, then their choices in reaching out are often restricted, sometimes extremely restricted. I know again for me, there was a high level of isolation between my family environment and the outside world. That really sent the message to me that there was no help available. If you wanted to scream for help, but pretty much knew that nobody would hear you, then you probably wouldn't bother, would you? Perhaps that's how you felt. So as I wrap up this thought on how you may have felt that you had to stay quiet, well, the good news is that you made it past that stage in your life, and if you're up for it, you no longer have to stay quiet. You have a voice, and if you choose the right people, in the right situation, in the right timing for you, you can find a voice where you had none before. So what might that look like? Well, you could seek out a suitable counsellor. Any reputable qualified counsellor should be of great assistance, but if you can, find someone who has experience with childhood sexual abuse. That would be an even better fit. I can speak from experience in that regard. Related to that then, try to find out if there are support groups or workshops for survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Where there are gender-specific ones, then try to get involved in those ones, as they will cover issues that are specifically based on your gender. Of course, if you've got good friends, then lean on them. If you call them a good friend, that's probably for a good reason. They're a good friend and they're probably good for you. So if you trust them enough, consider opening up to them. They may not have professional input or answers for you, but at the very least, they should be an ear to listen, and perhaps an ear you have never had before. Remember, we're talking about stopping the silence. We're talking about you regaining a voice in a safe way. The final thing I would like to mention in regards to no longer being silent is that it is a timing thing, and it is something that should not be forced before you are ready. If you're supporting somebody else through their abuse recovery, then remember that also. Them speaking up or sharing should be done in their timing. You can encourage them and support them in that, of course, but don't pressure them. So if you felt for the longest time that you could not speak up, most likely a side effect of that is an eroding of self-confidence, your self-belief that you can't speak up, perhaps about anything. Childhood abuse tends to not stay isolated in one area of our lives. In fact, it tends to leak into many areas of our lives, often unseen or unnoticed, but not unaffected. So in speaking up then, it's moving past the thought that if you did speak up, would anybody even listen? Well, I read often in the Bible that God is always there to listen, and in fact, He wants us to know we can come to Him, talk to Him, and He'll listen. Let me show you one such example. This is Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 16, which says, "Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." There's at least two great things right there. One, we can come to Him, and two, He'll help in our time of need. If you're hurting and working your way through recovering from childhood sexual abuse, then I'm sure that qualifies as a time in need. Thank you for joining me with this content. It's always my intention that this helps you or helps you to help others. In addition to other content like this, I wanted to also let you know that I have an introduction clip and also my personal testimony. I encourage you to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you are notified when additional content is available. Perhaps a little strange on a channel like this is the like button, but I would ask you to press that if you have found this content helpful. I hope you join me again soon.